Hey guys, welcome back to the Sheol Podcast. And if you're new, welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we have a very special episode. We're going to be speaking with Bill Lauto and talking about his fascinating research on the Shroud of Turin. As many of you know, the Shroud has been a subject of intrigue and debate for centuries. Thank you guys for being here. Can't wait for you to hear some of the stuff that Bill has learned about the Shroud, and feel free to reach out to us. Send us an email at thesheolpodcast@gmail.com and reach out to us here on the channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you real soon. I want to start with you telling us a little bit about your background and then how you ended up spending so much time studying the Shroud of Turin.
Okay. Well, my background is in environmental science and energy. I'm an independent consultant. I've been working in the field for over 40 years on the environment and basically saving energy because everything is connected. Little did I know that that field would also come in and work in tandem with the study of Jesus's burial cloth. Never would have expected it, but that's exactly what happened. And I found myself studying at the Pontifical University of Science and Faith in Rome, and received certification, a master's certification in shroud science, and now I've been tasked with presenting information on the shroud and also possibly setting up a permanent educational exhibit somewhere in New York City on the Shroud of Turin. So it's a big mission. When it all started in the very beginning, never did I think I would be where I am today. But everything truly is connected, and my work in the environmental field and in energy definitely brings several factors together to help confirm the Shroud of Turin and the information about Jesus and the day he was crucified.
So did you have a perspective? What were your thoughts on the Shroud before you started this research?
They were non-existent. I knew nothing about the Shroud, and that brings us into what sparked my first interest into the Shroud of Turin, and it brings me back to when I was 14 years old. I attended Catholic school in Brooklyn. All my friends were Catholic, and we moved when I was 12, 13 years old, and I was now in public school. I'm going to have to pause for a second. I'm sorry. That's my head cold. So you cut that out. All right. You said the software was easy to edit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is.
Okay. All right. So I found myself now in public school, and all my new friends were from many different backgrounds, and some didn't even believe in God. And I was going into the field of science. So as I got older, I was taking earth science. I was getting more involved with science classes. And I started to question the existence of God. So that's what the truth really is. Sometimes in the media and when you search my name and information comes up, somehow things get mixed up. But I had serious doubts that God existed. And as I got older, I did more and more homework, more and more research. No knowledge about the Shroud of Turin. So as I looked into all the other faiths, all the other religions, and read about them and studied them and see where they were coming from and what they were about, I finally decided to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and look up Jesus Christ. So it was a cold November night. I was almost 15 years old, and I'm looking into the encyclopedia on the Jesus, and I come to the last page of the section on Jesus, and I see a painting, and I turn the pages towards the front, and I see a drawing, I see a picture, I see a sculpture, I see another painting, all these different artist conceptions of what Jesus may have looked like. When I got to the first page of the section, there was a black and white photograph of Jesus. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I became acutely aware of the fact on how insignificant I was in this universe. And I said to myself, how am I looking at a photograph of Jesus? And the information on the Shroud of Turin was minimal at best. This was before the 1978 STURP team went to Italy, where all the scientists did that first major study. Actually, the second major study. There was a study done in right after the turn of the 1900s. But this was all modern science looking into how was this image created on this cloth. And that's what started for me. And the more I went into science, the more I learned, hey, scientists don't necessarily always believe in God. And my questions continued. But somehow that image on the Shroud of Turin always drew me back to continue to do my research. And the image I saw was the black and white photo of the cloth. When you look at the cloth, you just see a dull blur of the entire front and back of Jesus. This was a photograph of the cloth, and no man-made artwork, no human-made artwork does this. But when you take a photograph of the Shroud of Turin, instead of getting a negative, the old-fashioned film in the camera, on that film in the camera, you get a positive. And this is what it looks like. So this is an image that I've been carrying in my wallet since I was 14 years old. And this is what can't be explained. The most scientific studied icon in the history of humankind is the Shroud of Turin. And to this day, after over 100 years of studying it, no one can explain or reproduce that image exactly the way it is on the Shroud of Turin. So it pulled me back in every time. And I started to do more and more research into it. And before I know it, I am friends with Barry Schwartz, the Jewish photographer that was on the STURP team that went to Italy to photograph it in 1978. And I start to work with other scientists from that team, such as Dr. Jackson, because I was putting together a historical novel to show the entire trail of the Shroud of Turin from Jerusalem to the city of Turin in Italy today. I then wound up being introduced to Father Pasquale at the University of Science and Faith in Rome by Barry Schwartz, and I spoke and lectured to the seminarians on the environment and energy. And then I was invited to take the certification master's course on shroud science, and now I'm certified. I'm in task with handling the northeast section of the United States for presentations and hopefully making a permanent exhibit someday in New York City. So that's where I am today from 14 years old.
That there could be an exhibit in the States that people could go and see. And I know that from our research, there's a lot of interest in this topic. Can you tell us a little bit about the shroud itself and where it came from and how it, as you said, how it ended up in Turin?
Sure. The cloth is 100% linen, and it meets all the requirements of Jewish tradition 2,000 years ago. The cloth itself measures to just over 14 feet long and about almost 4 feet wide. It's been handled tremendously throughout the centuries. But the early history is very difficult to prove. As a scientist myself, you have to be careful when you say this is proof. We have evidence, we have theories. To go and say this is proof, you need to back it up with evidence and additional information from other scientific disciplines, not just one or two. So as of now, what we know is this cloth was used to cover Jesus when he was buried. And it went from Jerusalem to the city of Edessa, which is now in Turkey. From Edessa, it went to Constantinople. And then during the Fourth Crusade, it was brought over to Athens, Greece. And then it was taken to Lille, France. And finally to Turin, Italy. The story behind the travels is immense. The historical novel I did, which is all net proceeds go to charitable causes. So it's not something I did to make money or get attention with. I wrote it under a pseudonym. I didn't use my name. It's about Jesus. It's not about me. And it's the first of three. So the first book is Upper Room, The Way, 33 AD to 57 AD. That's the first book. So there'll be two more to complete the travels of the Shroud of Turin. And it looks like the title of the second book is going to be Upper Room, Teachings Lost. And that'll be from 57, not actually, because the epilogue in the first book brings us up to 500 AD. So it'll continue from there. Why? Because the shroud was hidden inside the wall of the city of Edessa for just over or just under 500 years. And no one knew where it was until it was found. So the story behind the cloth itself is remarkable. And I've come to the conclusion that this was purposely done by Jesus 2,000 years ago to leave us the evidence that we could only see today with our modern technology. That image, when you take a photograph of that cloth, was not seen by anybody 100 years ago until Padre Pio, a lawyer, an amateur photographer in Italy, took the very first successful photograph in 1888. And that triggered all the scientific research and studies. So the details started to come out, and the details are amazing, and they haven't stopped. And they constantly back up and support that this is the burial cloth of Jesus Christ.
I want to ask some questions about perspectives, and even your perspective a little more on the shroud. But before we do that, can we talk about some of the science behind what you do? Can you tell us like what type of methods and techniques you can use to study the shroud, which I'm assuming is not a lot of people have had their hands on that type of history, right?
No. And when I was 14 and first saw the image, there was no information out there because that was several years before the STURP team went. And that's when it hit Time magazine, the newspapers, and so forth. And of course, the controversy developed because and the controversy is just fueled by fear and money. But we could talk about that later. In regards to what I used, the scientific, I was concentrating on information from geological work, NASA, Earth's rotation, spin, the environment, the atmosphere, the temperatures. That was my thesis. But before I could even start that, I had to go into all the other scientific disciplines, just like every other science that's a Shroud scientist did. And the amount of every field has looked into this. I could actually read off a list to you if you want to, but you could edit it out if it's too much.
No, I think it's interesting. We want to hear what you have.
Archaeology, art, biology, botany, chemistry, climate. Excuse me. Sorry. Climology, engineering, environmental science, forensics, geology, history, medicine, paleoclimatology, palynology, photography, physics, textiles, and theology. Okay, to name a few. All of it comes together. All of it's connected. There is information on that shroud that has been studied by all those disciplines because they are the experts in that field. So it is overwhelming, to say the least. But when you put all the pieces together, you come to a conclusion that this was the last miracle done for us 2,000 years ago so we could see it today with our modern technology.
For you, what type of evidence or findings from this research did you find most compelling or convincing of that argument?
Okay, several pieces of evidence. For example, when the carbon dating test was done in 1988 and said, oh, it's a medieval forgery. I heard where they took the sample from, and immediately I said the test was done on a repair patch. It's on the edge of the cloth, and eventually over time, it has been proven. There's cotton woven into that sample. The whole cloth is made of linen, but it was a repair patch, and it was dyed to match the tinted yellow color of the rest of the shroud, because over age, the color changed. So when they did the repair patch in the 1400s or the 1300s, they dyed it to match. So the carbon dating test basically was correct because it tested the repair patch done in the 1300s. But we have several other testing that has been done since then, such as mechanical engineering, where they take one thread, they put tension on both sides, pull it apart, and when it breaks, they're able to tell the age of the thread. They've done that on cloths that wrap mummies, and they did it with the shroud, and it's 2,000 years old. In addition to that, due to the Freedom of Information Act, emails have been released between all the three labs and the people that did that carbon dating test in 1988. They knew it was wrong. They knew and purposely had the media run with the controversy because they loved it. They were selling commercials and doing specials every year and making money galore. And they went out and they told all the museums around the world, hey, you know that mummy you got? You want us to test the cloth to see how old it is? We did the Shroud of Turin. It's a fake. $50,000, please. Over 20 years of making money until the truth came out. So we have multiple other tests that show the cloth is 2,000 years old, and we have emails that say they knew the test was inaccurate. But greed, sadly, ruins this world. And also fear. A lot of people don't want to face the evidence from the Shroud of Turin because that creates a fear within them that now maybe they have to be accountable for their actions. So when you look at that and you take in take into the calculation human behavior. That's why there's a controversy. Fear and money. So it's a sad situation, but it's the truth. So now back to what convinced me. The cloth itself shows a spear wound on the right side. Okay. Now, the image was projected up onto the cloth, so it's on the left. It's the opposite. But the spear wound is on the right side between the fifth and sixth rib. Forensics, modern day medical forensics, looked at that. And they saw the blood flow underneath the wound. And they said, okay, it's not a lot of blood. This is a post-mortem wound, meaning Jesus was already dead on the cross. And they then put it under ultraviolet light. And under ultraviolet light, the invisible bodily fluid, the stain beyond the blood stain, comes visible. And now we're seeing something that no one could have seen. What forger in the Middle Ages said to themselves, oh, wait a minute, they're going to invent ultraviolet light in the future. Let me paint an invisible stain around the blood stain, so when they look at it, they're going to see, I could really fool them that way. Okay, let me put that in. No. Okay? So it matches our medical science today, because we know when someone is tortured, fluids build up and around the lung sac and the heart. And that spear wound between the fifth and sixth rib was known as the death blow by the Romans and the Greeks. It went through the lung into the heart, and water and blood will come out. And what do you know? The Gospels say the same thing. They describe the same thing when the wound was done. Why was the wound done? Because Pontius Pilate wanted proof that Jesus was already dead because he died too soon. The Romans wanted you to suffer on that cross for over a day. Jesus died way too soon. And the information on the shroud tells us probably what he died of. Carrying the crossbeam left wounds on his shoulder blades. Measuring with modern forensics the depth of those wounds, they estimate the wooden beam weighed between 75 to 125 pounds. Fall 3 times with your hands tied to that beam straight to the ground. Break your nose. Okay, he broke his nose. That's cartilage. It's not a bone. No bones were broken. We're still going along with everything that was said in the Gospels and the prophecies. But fall 3 times straight to the ground with that beam tied to you. He probably developed a small tear in his aorta. And we know from modern medical science that when someone's aorta ruptures, they scream out in pain and die. And what do we have from the Gospels? The description that Jesus gave out a cry and gave up his spirit. It matches medical science. So on that cross, he probably died of a ruptured aorta. That was started, the tear started when he fell 3 times. Now the environmental information from my thesis comes in to confirm this, because other scientists say, oh, he was bleeding a lot. He probably died from blood loss, or he was dehydrated. All that's true. But what was the temperatures? Everybody was estimated the temperatures back then in the morning were cool. And when it's cold, okay, you bleed out. When it's hot, your blood clots and you stop bleeding out. What was the temperature? That's my research. I had to find out what day did Jesus die. Scientists always had 2 dates. It has to conform with everything that we know. It had to be 2 Jewish holidays on the Passover. 2 Jewish holidays on the Sabbath, the evening of the Sabbath, which was Friday. Pontius Pilate had to be in power. All these things, Roman history, Jewish history, all this has to come in and meet fill in the equation for the day he died. So we have 2 dates. But now we want to know what the temperature was, and we need to confirm that with other information. So what do we have from the Gospels? Well, the sun and the skies grew dark. They thought the day was later than what it actually was. What made the sun get blocked out? It wasn't a solar eclipse. NASA has programs to go back 2,000 years and take into consideration the change in the Earth's tilt and the rotation to know exactly what was going on. Because 100 years ago, scientists said, well, wait a minute, the prophecy said that there was going to be a blood moon that night. So if there's a lunar eclipse at night, there can't be a solar eclipse during the day. But they calculated everything and they said, nope, there was no lunar eclipse in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago on the 2 dates. But they were wrong. They didn't take into consideration the change in Earth's rotation and the tilt of our axis. NASA was able to do that. And yes, there was a lunar eclipse 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem. The blood moon came up over the horizon as the evening fell. But now what blocked out the sun during the day? Well, because of the warming temperatures today, the Dead Sea has withdrawn. And we have core samples from the Dead Sea. And those core samples show us there was earthquakes at various times. One of them matches the day Jesus was crucified. And on the disturbed earth for the earthquake is dust. We know recently from an earthquake in Mexico, and the scientists that study that, because there was an earthquake and it triggered a dust storm. And after they looked at the core samples of the disrupted earth, there was dust on top of it. That's the same thing in the Dead Sea. So it was a dust storm that blocked out the sun and caused everybody to think it was a lot later than what it actually was. And now I go into some additional scientific studies. In 1998, a team went to Mount Kenya and took core samples from the glacial lake over 4,000 meters up and discovered 2,000 years ago the planet was in a warming period. We were 4.5 degrees Celsius hotter than what we are today. And nobody was driving SUVs back then. That means 4,000 feet down to sea level, the temperature at high noon in Jerusalem was probably about 100.5 degrees Fahrenheit. It was hot, and thus you don't bleed out. And thus all the men were wearing sudariums, a sweat cloth tied around their neck. And we have a sudarium in Spain with mucus blood and sweat stains that match the Shroud of Turin's face, pinpoint computer accuracy. It covered the same person. And that sudarium, I believe, was the Apostle John. It belonged to him. He was the only one there that would have had a sudarium around his neck. The only 2 other men that were there at the foot of the cross was Joseph and Nicodemus, 2 rabbis, well-dressed, probably not wearing a sudarium. Jesus dies on the cross. The centurion goes to report to Pontius Pilate. This is going to take time. They covered his face out of respect with that sudarium, that sweat cloth. And how do we know they were able to do that? Back to the spear wound. That spear wound is measured out to show us that it was the Roman short spear that was used. The spearhead was the small one, not the long spear that they threw. It was no more than 3 feet long, that spear, the stick to that spearhead. That tells us the cross was not much taller. Sorry. It was not much taller than 6 feet tall. So they were able to reach up and cover his face with that sudarium, and that's how the Roman soldier was able to confirm he was dead by putting that spear through the fifth and sixth rib and having the water and blood spray out onto his face. So all the pieces start to come together and everything starts to get an exclamation and explains everything out to a point where it all matches, it's all connected, and it all makes sense. So that of itself starts confirming. Now, what do we have left? We have a date that Jesus was crucified. It was April 3rd, 33 AD.
That is a really compelling argument. Can I ask before I go a little further with some of these questions? Do you frequently do talks or engage with other scientists on this topic?
Yes, and that's Rome has started a SAGE group here in the United States. It's the Shroud Apostolate Group English. That's what the SAGE stands for. And I've been assigned the Northeast of the United States to do these presentations, show replicas, and to do the talks, and then eventually, hopefully, maybe set up a permanent educational exhibit somewhere in New York City. So yes, I do go about, and I bring replicas with me so people could actually see what the crossbeam looked like, what the spear looked like, and also the crown of thorns wasn't a crown. The wounds on the shroud tell us it was a cap of thorns. Oh, now it starts to make sense. What Roman would have taken the time to perfectly weave a nice, pretty little round crown, cut their fingers and bleed, and put it on Jesus's head? No. They went to the thicket with their sword, chopped off a bunch of branches, and they slammed it down on his head. And that matches the wounds on the Shroud of Turin. It was a cap of thorns, like a helmet. And they banged it down with the reeds and the sticks they had and pushed his head up into it. So the replica of that is far more terrorizing than a nice little crown that goes around your head. And these are the facts that are being taught to us from what is left behind on the Shroud of Turin. And and then when people, I have to say, just in regular conversations, sometimes something will come up and we're talking about God, and my colleagues may say, Bill, you're a scientist. You don't believe in all that God stuff. And I'll reach into my pocket and take out my wallet, and I'll say, yeah, that's true. I don't believe. I know. Explain away this image on this cloth, and then maybe I'll talk to you about the possibility of there being no such thing as God. And their mouths drop open. Many of them have no idea what they're looking at. And when I start to explain it, they don't have anything else to say. They know they got to go home and do homework. Okay. Don't listen.
You so easily refuted the dating back in, you said it was 88?
Right.
Do you think...
I'm sorry. No, I just remember that day very clearly. So go ahead.
Well, I just wonder if in the research that we did, which is obviously minimal compared to the work that you've done, it doesn't seem like, do you think people are aware of that sort of forgery of science, or are there still people that give credence to the lab that was falsifying that data?
Yes. And a lot of people still cling to it and have to believe it because they don't want to be accountable. They can't possibly be a God. I'm God. They replace God with themselves. And that's, you cannot go and say to that person, listen to me. No, they have to ask questions and you just answer them. And all you could do is plant the seeds for their homework, their thoughts. When a person's in that position, it's up to them. You can't go and I'm going to convert you. No, it doesn't work that way. It has to come from their heart. And So, yeah, there's a lot of people out there that don't even know about the shroud. And I'm talking about even priests. There's even priests that have no knowledge of the Shroud of Turin. That this is a burial cloth that we've had for 2,000 years, plus the sudarium that covered his face. And John's gospel says when Peter and John went into the tomb, the real translation from Greek, the word used, translates into they saw the cloths, plural, laying flat. What were the cloths? And it says one was placed on the side. That was the sudarium, rolled up and placed above the head on the stone, separate. That's why there's no image on it, because it wasn't on his body. It was removed, and then he was covered by the shroud, and the shroud was folded over. So, what was the other cloth? It was a strip that was wrapped around the cloth to hold it closed. Was it tied closed? No. The Jewish people did not do that. They weren't Egyptians. They actually had the tradition of sometimes putting a bell inside the tomb because they waited outside the tomb for 3 days to make sure the person was really dead. If the person woke up, they could ring the bell and say, "Hey, I'm in here. I'm alive. Let me out." That's why they always waited 3 days. The Romans and the Jewish soldiers did that for them. When Jesus was buried, the tomb was guarded. So it was being watched for the 3 days. After the third day, that's when Mary Magdalene and the other women went to the tomb. Did they go there to anoint the body? No, not tradition, not Jewish tradition. The body was tortured. All the blood, all the fluid had to be buried with the body. That's why the sudarium was buried with the body, but doesn't have a cloth on it. Doesn't have an image on it, I'm sorry. So they went there to burn incense outside the tomb to cover up the stench. That was tradition. After the third day, there was no way the Roman soldiers were going to Pontius Pilate's seal on that tomb and open it up for them. So they went there just to burn incense, and they found the tomb open. So that's the tradition. The body had to be, everything that was lost, the bodily fluid, the blood, had to be buried with the body. And washing the body was not done. You did not wash the body of somebody who was tortured or wounded, because the bodily fluids and blood had to be buried with him. When someone died of natural causes, that's when the Jewish people washed the body and prepared it to be buried. Okay? And it all had to be done within the day the person died. So that's why they were running out of time. By the time they got permission to take Jesus' body down from the cross, it was already coming to day's end. And that starts the next day for the Jewish timetable. The Romans started their next day at midnight. The Jewish people started their next day at sundown. And that explains why Jesus did the Passover meal Thursday night. Because once the sun went down, it was Passover. That started the next day. And he chose to have the meal then, while mostly everybody else and the rabbis were going to have their meal Friday. At the end of the day, Friday. So Jesus did have the Passover meal on Passover. It was after sundown. All Jewish tradition. Jewish tradition, no coins on the eyes. The images that some people say, there might be coins placed on the eyes. Further scientific study with electronic microscopes, no coins. And that's Jewish tradition. There is no way Nicodemus or Joseph, rabbis, would have placed pagan coins on Jesus' eyes. They did not believe in, here's some money to pay the ferryman to get you to the other side. That was Greek. Okay? Putting money in the mouth, putting money on the eyes so that they could have money to pay someone to ferry them over to the other side was Greek and Roman, not the Jewish people. So there's no coins no image of coins on the eyes, and that matches Jewish tradition. Everything continues to fall into place. The third cloth. If you look at the shroud, the whole length, I was trying to look for the picture for you. Okay, I have it. Okay, so that's the whole cloth, 14 feet long. Here's his face. Here's the back of his head. His back, his feet. Oh, by the way, on the feet is a lot of blood, a lot of dirt. And you know what they just discovered just recently? Fingerprints in the blood and the dirt. What forger in the Middle Ages would say, oh, they're going to invent fingerprints in the future. Let me paint in some fingerprints in the blood and the dirt on the bottom of his feet. Whoever helped take Jesus down from the cross and held his feet left their fingerprints in the blood. That's another thing that convinces. So this is the front of his body, his arms, the blood flow down his arms, the front of his legs. Scourged front and back, from top to bottom. His buttocks has scourge marks on it. And from the marks, we know what whip the Romans used. It was the one with the 3 lead balls, not the one Mel Gibson showed with the bone chips from sheep tearing out the flesh. Those wounds don't match. So Hollywood got it wrong. Imagine that. Anyway, and the nails went through the wrist because the Romans knew what they were doing. If the nail went through the hand like Mel Gibson showed in the movie, the nail would rip right through the hand, proven during medical scientists on cadavers. It would rip right through and come out between the fingers, and the body would fall off. It went in, okay, through the wrist and out the hand here. So the arms are folded over on the top of the shroud, as you could see. So they see the nail wound on the top of the hand. And all the artists throughout the Middle Ages did the paintings showing the nail wounds in the hand. But no, it's on an angle, and it comes from the other side through the wrist, right in between all the bones, so that it could hold the body up. Mm-hmm. So here the whole body is shown. And this is all the patches and from the fire. So that's another whole story. And then at the bottom is the photograph. When you take the picture, you could then see the details. But what I want to point out here is this line. You see this, here's the repair patch they took the sample from for the 1988 carbon dating test. And I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there's a faint line running across the whole length of the shroud. It is professionally rewoven back on with first century technology, with first century seamstress. So that was the cloth that was just wrapped around the body. So that if someone woke up and said, hey, I'm not dead, let me out, you're able to get out of it. You weren't tied close into this cloth. And you know what? When Jesus brought Lazarus back from the dead, he purposely waited 4 days. He went past the 3-day mark purposely because the waiting period was over. The stench was there. They were burning incense to cover up the stench. And Jesus goes open up the tomb and they say, Lord, the stench will be great. And Lazarus comes forth. That's not a coincidence. And as a scientist, I don't believe in coincidences. So everything starts to fall into place. Now, we got that strip which wrapped and held the cloth close, matching John's plural, the word in Greek saying plural, meaning cloths. Who had seamstress to put that cloth back on right then and there after Jesus' resurrection? It wasn't the apostles. None of them was reported or known to be a seamstress, a professional one at least. Who could have possibly helped them out to get that rewoven back on and to get that shroud out of the city of Jerusalem when Saul was going around and persecuting the Christians and St. Stephen was stoned to death. That's when things really got bad. Who could have helped them? So you start to think, you start putting the pieces together, and you find there's 3 Christian religions in Africa where Christianity went first that have Pontius Pilate's wife as a saint. And one of those religions has Pontius Pilate himself with his wife as a saint. What stories were verbally transferred down among the people to hold Pontius Pilate as a saint and his wife? Perhaps his wife and her professional seamstress were the ones that helped the apostles reweave that strip back on. And possibly Pontius Pilate himself looked the other way to help them get the shroud out of Jerusalem. And that is the information that you start to put together, and that's what I put together to put into my historical novel, Upper Room the Way. And everything starts to fall into place. So the story is immense, and unfortunately, the story is not really told. It is an untold story. But it's a powerful story. It's powerful evidence, powerful connections, all done by Jesus 2,000 years ago on that linen cloth so that we would have it for us to see today. And I can't ignore that evidence as a scientist. And I come to one conclusion: the last miracle Jesus did while he was still on earth for us today.
What about the picture, right? The imprint of the face on the cloth. Are there any because what I've heard, I want you to correct me if I'm wrong here, is that there could be you would need a light source to create that. Is there anything about how that is there? Are we way off base to assume that, or?
Yeah, but this is the theories that have been laid out now. What created the image? So we have come down to physics to try to give us some type of explanation, or at least a theory, on what created the image. The energy it took for that resurrection to occur created the image. How could we understand that? How could we explain that in the scientific community? Well, we can't reproduce it because calculations from mathematicians show the amount of energy needed not to burn the cloth, but yet to create that image, not to scorch the cloth or anything, because it's not burnt. It's on the top micro layer of the fiber. You could actually scratch the image off with your fingernail. It's got 3-dimensional data in it. What did that? The amount of energy needed, and if it was a flash of light, some say was equivalent to a solar flare on the surface of the sun. That's more energy than what we've produced since humans have been on this planet. That's the theory. The other information, going by what the Gospel said, that the cloths were laying flat with the proper translation from Greek. Dr. Jackson has presented that the body passed through the cloth, and the cloth fell through the body and laid flat, still tied closed. That's when John and Peter went in. They saw and they believed because the cloth was still there. It wasn't disturbed. The body wasn't in it anymore, and it was still with the cloth wrapped around it. Nobody took the body out. Peter and John realized that this was no longer a burial cloth, but a resurrection cloth, and they took it with them. Because if they left it behind, it would have been destroyed by the Romans. They had to take it with them. They could not possibly have left that behind. And they took the sudarium too. Put it on the table that they had the Last Supper, and there it sits, still wrapped close. Could you imagine what the reaction was, what went through that upper room when they eventually untied it and opened it up and saw on that bright, white, pure, 100% linen cloth, the full crucified body, front and back of Jesus with the red blood and the wounds? Time must have stood still in that room. And then you have physics come in and say, well, you know what? There's no such thing as time and distance. There's no such thing as time and space. We know gravity affects time. Space travel, we know that. Einstein's theory, going to the moon, the atomic clocks, everything starts to fall into place. And we have in the Gospels, Jesus appeared to a couple outside their town, a day's journey away from Jerusalem, that Sunday evening. Come in, break bread with us. He breaks the bread. They recognize him to be Jesus, and he is gone in a flash of light. And where does he appear? A day's journey away in the upper room with locked doors. Time and space, time and distance no longer existed for Jesus after his resurrection. So if you want to try to understand the realm of heaven, it's a place where there's no such thing as time and distance. And that's what we have left. So a blast of energy, the body going through the cloth, the image being created, time and space, it becomes a topic which we could discuss on its own. So it could become mind-boggling, obviously, because just look at it. What's our closest star? Alpha Centauri. It's 4.5 light years away. Do people realize what that means? That means you're traveling at the speed of light for 4.5 years. The speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. But yet for the person on that spaceship, we know today that they will, traveling at the speed of light, they would be there instantly. For us on Earth, 4.5 years would have gone by.
What's really standing out to me is it sounds like you're saying the shroud itself is evidence for a miracle, like the miracle of the resurrection that is discussed, debated in all sorts of, from a theological standpoint, a scientific standpoint, historical standpoint. That's the part that is kind of amazing to me about this discussion. How do you approach people who are skeptics on this specific topic, like people that disagree with the authenticity of the shroud?
I do not try to prove anything to them. I just answer their questions if they ask. If they don't, they'll see in my face my hesitation to agree with them. And that might provoke them to ask a question or two. But I basically put them on an assignment to start doing their own homework. And there's so much information out there on the shroud, it's true. But if you want to get all the scientific data, that's what's coming out of all the scientists working on the shroud for all these decades, based in Rome and in Turin. And Father Andrew Dalton, some people may not want to go to a priest, but Father Andrew Dalton starts things off with a YouTube video, which is a very good introduction. I myself have my blog under my pseudonym that I wrote the historical novel. So those are some places that people could start. But, just like anyone who's an atheist, an agnostic, it's not for us to go and prove them wrong. It's for us just to give them some seeds to plant. They have to nourish it. They have to grow it, and they have to come to believe on their own. And then that's basically how the conversations go with skeptics. If they do hang around long enough, yeah, their mouths will be dropped open. But many times they flee. They leave. That picture that I showed you from my wallet, I carried it. This is the one with the 3-dimensional data. I have some extras in my wallet, and sometimes I'll give it to a person if I feel they need it. And the people that need it will thank me, hug me. For those who I feel are in trouble and I go to give this to them, they usually reject it. They don't even want to touch it. So that's their battle. It's not for me to fight. It's not for me to win. It's just the first seed for them to start questioning themselves and to start rethinking things. Because this isn't just a coincidence. This isn't just one or two things. I just touched upon a few of the facts, few of the pieces of evidence from the Shroud that is just overwhelming and convincing that it's authentic. And there isn't one theory left saying it's a fake. They're all been disproven.
So I think what a lot of people, what keeps a lot of people from faith is they're clinging to science. And I think I know the answer to this question, but do you believe there's implications from your research that should impact the way people look at history, science, and faith rather than as more cohesive, rather than being at odds all the time?
Yes. Yeah, no, everything I've done in the field of energy, the environment, and theology, everything is connected. And the more you look at it, the more they work together. Is faith and reason work in tandem. They're not at odds with each other. Most of the scientific discoveries and breakthroughs came from scientists who were priests. The Big Bang Theory, he was a priest. It goes on and on and on. So there's no, the only argument between reason and faith is the argument within someone's own head, someone's own heart, because they don't want to take the time to read or do the homework, or they basically feel they're in control, they're in charge, and that's it. I'm good. But there's a lot more to what's going on. And just start to try to understand time and distance, time and space. So it's mind-boggling.
Well, Bill, I really want to be respectful of your time because I know you've taken some time this morning to share a lot with us. Do you have time for just a couple more questions?
Yes, I did block out the whole morning because I have no problem continuing to speak, even though I have a head cold. But I definitely want to try to spread the information. It's my mission now. I can't ignore that. I'm just very blessed and happy that my environmental background has come into this and contributed to this confirming information on the Shroud. I do get very upset when, people go out and make controversy to make money. In my field, there's so many people in the media that would never listen to me back in the 1980s on the environment. Just wasn't popular enough. And then all of a sudden, a movie came out. Okay. So, on the environment, my former vice president, and everything changed. The media said, oh, wow, we can make money off of this. And now they all want to hear information. But I go in with the science, the real science, not from scientists who want 15 minutes of fame, but the scientists who have the complete picture, who don't make predictions. And they don't like hearing that from me or any of my colleagues, because they want to keep the sensation going to continue selling more and more specials, advertisements, ads, newspapers, whatever the case may be. And the same thing is being done with the Shroud of Turin. And it's a sad situation. But yes, everything falls into place. And I was just very happy that I was able to do this research in the environmental field, the geology field, and bring pieces of the puzzle together to confirm what was actually going on that day. The dust storm, confirming that it was a lunar eclipse, the blood moon, and also the temperatures that would have clotted the blood, leading to more belief that Jesus gave out a loud cry and gave up his soul because the aorta finally ruptured on him. That was torn and teared from possibly those falls with the beam on his shoulders. It starts to make a lot of sense, because the whip that was used, the flagrum that was used to whip Jesus, had the lead balls. So there wasn't a lot of blood loss with that. The bleeding was under the skin. The impact was like a cigarette burn. Take a cigarette to the skin, each one of those lead balls hitting. And there was 3 straps on each flagrum, 2 Roman soldiers on each side, alternating, whipping them from the top to the bottom, from the bottom to the top. Yeah.
I think you're probably the right person to ask this question. But for our viewers and listeners that are going to hear this and go, these are amazing findings, I want to know more about it, or I want to read more about the evidence you have, where do you recommend people go to learn about the Shroud?
Okay, they could start off with Father Andrew Dalton's introduction video on YouTube. So it's youtube.com/watch, WATCH, question mark, small v as in Victor, equal sign, capital V, U, I, E, C as in cat, 9, T as in Tom, I, Y, F, 0. And I hope the capitals and the lowercase don't matter too much. But I guess if you go to youtube.com and just type in search Father Andrew Dalton, his videos will come up. And if people want to look at my blog, that's www.booksbyljwilliams.com. And that's my pseudonym, LJ Williams. It's plural with the S at the end. And the exact link is after .com. It's /upper room the way with a hyphen in between each word.
So you said the books you're working on, there's three books?
Yes. So the first one is out in hardcover, paperback, and digital. This, let's see, I'll get you one to show you at least. So that's the hardcover.
Oh, that is a thick book.
Yeah, it's just over 300 pages, and that's the paperback. And it's also digital. So, and all net proceeds go to charity. So this is 33 to 57. And the epilogue in the back, that brings us up to 544. And let's confirm if I'm right. And from what I remember, I got a bibliography in the back of it too. It's not like, okay, this stuff comes out of thin air. There's also maps to show what Jerusalem looked like back then and the land and the travels of the Shroud. And also translations of digits and other things that the Romans used so that people could relate inches to the measurements. So like a digit was a finger. So that works out to about 0.728 inches. So when they start seeing measurements, they get an idea. And yes, it's 544 AD with the epilogue. So the second book will be Upper Room, Teachings Lost. And that will be from 544 AD up to 1898 when Secondo Pio took the first successful photograph. And I've been working on that book for years. I'm afraid it may be close to 800 pages long. And if I can't keep it exciting, obviously it's going to be cut down. So, but it's like some of these HBO specials. What went on between the royalty and the travels of the Shroud and the Crusades. It's amazing. It's survived all this, and it's still here for us today. It's just amazing. So,
well, I do want to ask you one more question, but would it be possible for you to send us the links where people can buy the book so we can put that up for everybody?
Sure. It's all on Amazon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if they go to Amazon and just put in Upper Room The Way by L.J. Williams, it'll come up.
Okay.
If it doesn't, you could put in the whole title, Upper Room The Way, 33 AD to 57 AD by L.J. Williams.
So, Bill, what is it that drives you to continue this work? Like, what is your goal or your mission for letting people know more about the Shroud?
This past summer, I was invited to the Eucharistic Congress that was in Indianapolis. It was a tremendous event, and I was the scientist that was going to be available at the Shroud exhibit to answer people's questions. So many of my colleagues were there too, but I'm the only one in the science field. Others that are involved with the Shroud and helping out with the programs might be an engineer, a marketing person that was touched by the Shroud and Jesus's image on the Shroud. So I was there, and I was told that my research and my thesis for certification now, they wanted me to present next year at the scientific conference that's being held in St. Louis. So I'm very honored for that. But what makes me continue and go with this, I have to tell you that at that Eucharistic Congress, the Shroud exhibit was the most attended exhibit out of all of them. The line was 3 hours long for the 4 days. It never let up. We were operating the first day from noon to 6 in the evening. I lost my voice. It was nonstop. We didn't even have time to go to the bathroom. We did the best we could. The next day, open up earlier. The next day, open up even earlier so priests could come in before the crowds. And the next day, we got to close down because Jonathan Rumi, I believe if I'm saying his name correctly, he plays Jesus in the series The Chosen. He came in to see the exhibit to get information on the Shroud. And I got to meet him and speak with him. But it wasn't that. What it was that as people came in, they saw a 7-minute introduction video, 55 people at a time. Then they went into the next section of the exhibit where we had 24 7-foot-tall canvas posters with pictures and literature to read. In the center were a few tables with some replicas, the Capathorns and so forth. The actual size of the nails, which were about 9 inches long. And people came in, and I saw their faces. They just saw an introduction video that was titled, "Who is the Man in the Shroud?" And they came into the next room hoping for an answer, and they were overwhelmed. I saw their faces going, oh my God, there's not enough time to take all this in. This is too much. How can I make a decision or come to any conclusion? And I immediately started ad-libbing and giving talks, explaining the replicas. Because after answering questions, I knew what they were asking, what they wanted to ask, what they had to know. And I started giving a 7-minute talk. So then the next crowd could come in and they could move on to see the actual life-size replica of the Shroud. And I will never forget their faces. These people came in and they were overwhelmed, and I give up. And they were looking at me like, what am I supposed to do? This is overwhelming. This is too much. You can't expect us to read all this in 7 minutes or 10 minutes. What are you doing to us? And I started to give this talk each time. And I had people crying, thanking me, saying amen. Because I said that intro video said, who's the man in the shroud? Well, I'm a scientist, and I'm here to tell you that man in the shroud is Jesus the Christ, the Son of God, and that was his burial cloth, and that was the last thing he did for us to have today to see with our modern technology. And they were starving for the information. They just wanted to get all the information, all the facts. They wanted the fears, they wanted the greed and the money to be put out there to show what it is and say, okay, this is why the carbon dating test went on for 20 years in the media. They loved the sensationalization of it, and they made lots of money, both the scientists and the media. And now here's the things that you can't deny. Here's the facts. And they were so thankful to say, yes, it makes sense that they would just smash the thorns on his head and not sit there making a nice, pretty little crown. And all the pieces came into place. And that's what drives me. I have to answer those faces. I have to put out that information to be able to give them the seeds so that they could take it from there on and share it with their families and their friends. Because in the end, on this planet, what is really left? And I ended each talk with this. If Jesus came down off that cross, perfectly healed, and banned all the Roman soldiers out of Jerusalem, and with a wave of his arm, and said, there you go. There is your proof that I am the Son of God. Now enjoy your lives. I'm going to go to heaven to be with our Father. We would be screaming today, saying, what does God understand about our suffering here on earth? What does he know about what we have to go through? Our pain. Yes, happiness too, but everything all together. How could he possibly understand and let this continue? And the answer is, he didn't come off that cross healed. He suffered on that cross. He suffered the worst of the worst for us to have forgiveness of our sins, for us to start anew, for us to have free will to decide what we're going to do with our lives. We could develop medicines to find cures for diseases, or we could fly planes into buildings. It's our choice. God is not going to control us like puppets on strings. And he died on that cross for us to have life after this planet. And that life is in the realm of heaven, where time and space don't exist.
Bill, I think I don't want to oversell this conversation, but I think the way that you've put this together is maybe the most profound integration of science, history, and faith that I've ever heard. And we really appreciate you coming on and doing this on short notice, and just giving so much information out in this hour. Love to, maybe down the road we can have you on again. I really do appreciate your time here.
No, you're welcome, and thank you for helping to get the information out there. And no, of course, I'll be happy to get down to the specifics of any individual section, topic, evidence. So with everything comes names, comes the dates, comes the facts, the blood samples, and so forth. The blood itself, it's AB negative. It's the rarest blood for back then and today. Less than 3% of the people in the world have that blood type. Back then, 2,000 years ago, it was probably less than half of 1%. And that's the same blood on the Sudarium in Spain. And that's the same blood from the Shroud that's in the Eucharistic miracles that have been confirmed by the church around the world. So if you want to step back and pause, is that a coincidence? And again, as a scientist, I can't believe in coincidences. I have to follow the evidence, get all the facts, look at the complete picture, and come to a conclusion.